All right, thank you for your appearance and welcome back at the meeting in action again. So the next item on the agenda, Treasury Management Audit, we've done that. Rates information.
Oh, so, Mr. Chair, there's just page 77, the staff report.
Oh, sorry.
The Treasury Management.
Right, sorry.
Which
you go.
is the materials predominantly covered off through the MRSA update, but probably just a couple of key points to highlight in here, and it links with the discussion that Councillor Dunbar-Smith had raised in terms of the way that we report our financial performance, our investment fund return, and the complexity that's been dealt with this year and as a result of the high inflation. And so, as mentioned previously, Council has a policy in terms of from its the return generated from the investment fund. The first priority for that return is to inflation-proof the base capital fund. And so this year, we've had to put aside $5.5 million to inflation-proof that fund, which sees our investment equalisation reserve, which is the reserve that sort of smooths out returns from year to year. In the good years, you put money into it, and the not so good years, you can take money out of it. Sees that reserve in a deficit balance of $5.6 million. So as Brian Kearney from MRSA mentioned, one of the pieces of work that we need to do is the investment strategy, which part of that will consider our return targets as well as our spend targets, and that deficit reserve balance will need to be taken into account in those conversations as an input into our forward planning, and particularly what goes into the long-term plan around investment fund assumptions. The other point just I wanted to note for Councillor's attention, under paragraphs 28 and 29, just noted the review of our strategic investment fund advisor. So some members of the committee were involved in the process to select an advisor to Council for that process, with the appointment of Ed Shuck from Fidato Advisory being made. So I've been working closely with Ed over the last couple of weeks around the market approach for the review of that advisor. So that's a review of the role that MRSA play. There is a closed request for proposal that's out in the market at the moment. We're expecting responses to that by the 25th of August, and committee members will have a couple of placeholders in your calendars to meet with or interview the shortlisted recommendations, shortlisted candidates or recommended candidates, to inform a decision that will be a recommendation that will go to the September Council meeting. So that work is at pace, would be fair to say.
Councillor Nebo.
I've never been through that process before. I'm clearly not an accountant. I wouldn't mind a bit of a pre-meeting meeting with you, Chris and Janine, just to give us a bit of a heads up of the sorts of things we should be looking for. I mean, obviously I understand what we're doing, but selecting a new advisor isn't something so yeah.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair, I guess that's why we've got Ed working with us as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You may remember Ed when he was the New Zealand Managing Director, I think, for Russell Investments. So he's actually come out of that sector, but is now providing consultancy services. So his knowledge and expertise will be something that I think we will all be leaning into quite heavily, which is why we had councillors involved in the appointment into that role.
Yeah. Thanks, Janine, on that. So we have any other questions? Sorry, Janine, on? Not, we've got resolution in front of us. Dory and Bell. Second, thank you. All in favour? Please say aye. Aye. Carried. Ahead of myself or behind myself now?
Page 87.
Yeah. Right, so Janine's still on the chair and provide us with a report on the rates information to the 30th of June 2023. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an update on our rates collection activity for the last financial year, noting that in terms of our current year rates, we've achieved a collection rate of 96%. So in line with we'd achieved the previous year and pretty much our sort of target return, or where we seem to be able to if we take into account all those other payments, so payment arrangements that are in place, remissions and other adjustments, the net of our current year outstanding rates is 2.18%, which is again in line with the last financial year. We have provided there for your information the list of all of the remissions that have been granted this financial year and compared to last year. One of the key changes that we have seen and based on discussions through this committee has been greater uptake of the hardship remission. And so that's been through a couple of initiatives. One, in terms of our rates team working in conjunction with all of the councils in the region, but the ones that we've had particular success with Hamilton City, Waipa and Waitomo. So where their ratepayers are applying for the DIA rates rebate, there's also a process for them to be applying for our rate hardship remission. So that's resulted in some additional applications for that remission. And the other change that has been made, which is currently done under my delegation until we review the policy, is to work around the current policy requirement for ratepayers to enter into a direct debit for the payment of their rates. Some demographics of our community are not comfortable with direct debits as a payment method. And so the assurance that we're looking for is that they don't carry any rates arrears, so that they are honouring the rates that they're required to pay. But as long as they do that, then we will provide the hardship remission as well. So the policy, as intended, will be revised if council wishes to retain it, to remove that direct debit requirement, but still require full payment of rates in every rating year. So that's resulted in us being able to push more ratepayers through that remission. There's a number of graphs provided that show the distribution of rates outstanding for the current year and how that compares to previous years. I think if we look at the graph in bullet point 14, which is current year arrears as a percentage of the rates charged by territorial authority, you can see that's reasonably consistent across all of the districts, but with slight increases around Otahonga District, South Waikato District and Waitomo. I've checked in with the rates team in terms of whether there is any particular reason for that. There's nothing that is coming through customer calls in relation to any issues in those areas. Feedback has been that potentially those parts of the region that have greater areas of freehold land. Final point, we note within the report the rates write-offs that have been approved by the Chief Executive. So the new Local Government Rating Act provides the Chief Executive with the authority to write off rates where they are deemed to be uncollectible, but we report those back to the committee to provide transparency of adjustments that have been made. That's probably it from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Janine. I have a couple of questions. The first one is just a point of clarification on the terms of change of policy. Done through the
yes, it will be. Our rates, to change our rates remission policies requires consultation And so the easiest way to do that is through TP program.
Thank you. And the other question is just in relation to debt which has become statute barred. Do we have a flagging system which highlights these when they get a 2-year recovery?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So the team are looking actively at all of that debt. So we have two of the staff in the rates team who are dedicated to rates collection. There are some accounts where the ratepayer is uncontactable, the details are incorrect or whatever it may be, which are the ones that tend to fall into the statute barred, but every effort made to minimize the amount that's written off as a result of that. And I think if we look at, 63,000 of rates written off out of total rates revenue in excess of 100 million, it's overall quite really pleasing performance.
Absolutely, and I agree 100%. I guess the reason for asking that is that the most significant portion of that is statute barred debt.
Yeah.
So if we've got a system which flags that with a 4-year or 3-year runway,
that we don't get to
these
that
people
point.
are professional avoiders of paying rates and taxes. So just get to be a couple of steps ahead of them. Okay. Any other questions? So
thank you, Chair. My question was on the same point, or your last point, in that 200,000 statute barred. I suppose just to reiterate what Chris has said is that councils, in my experience, don't act early enough. And I'm very familiar with rating sales, having been in that position to collect reparation and go to victims and that when I was running the section at the courthouse. And it's not a something you want to go into lightly, but as urged, Mr. Chair, the people who just play the system, there are some properties, I'm not sure would they be in this, that we can't touch, such as Mary land. Those, whether they're known or not, there is ways and means under the civil jurisdiction to initiate those proceedings. And I just wonder whether council is reluctant or it's just something that we have not really got a good process to bring this to a head earlier. Like if I pay, I expect others to pay.
But yeah, I'll pass that to Janine, but public excluded section will some oversight as to what some collective action is.
Yeah, I mean, through you, Mr. Chair, I would say that we have really well-defined and well-utilised rates collection processes. There are instances where ratepayers are not contactable, identifiable, whatever it may be, which are the ones that fortunately fall into a statute barred situation, despite all of the efforts made by the team. I'm very comfortable with the processes that we utilise. Be one of the best staff in the country in terms of leading our rating function. So,
Thanks, Janine. Councillor.
Well, my two questions were exactly the same as those, but just to follow on that, just first with the rates mission or the rates rebate, I'm really passionate about, we do something in the long-term plan, but we could just make it clear that is there any way that we can do the job better for that? Because it's generally the people that don't have the expertise or the skills to access or know about it, and whether we can delve into that, because, especially with 80% of mortgage rates coming out in the next 6 months, from 2.9 to 6.5, is going to have a huge amount in our next rating year, I believe, hardship. So that, and then just onto the debt category, I wouldn't mind just a little bit more in depth, whether it's historical numbers of how many out of the 217,000 ratepayers, how many properties that incorporates, you know, is it one large, like we look at Maori freehold land, is it one large or two, three large blocks, or is it small ones going through hardship or whatever?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I can respond maybe in terms of the hardship permission policy. I think when our policy was developed, which started off as part of our COVID-19 response package, one of the things that I was really conscious of was not putting my staff in the position of being required to determine hardship, because I think that's a really difficult position to be in, and a real judgment that's required in that, which is why the policy relies on eligibility for the DIA rebate. And that is at the really low end of, you know, where people are struggling very much and they have very little that they are trying to get by on. But it does avoid the position of us needing to judge what hardship means and what it looks like in an individual circumstance. So that's the basis of the policy at the moment. Certainly something that we can look at, and it might not be the eligibility criteria, but now that we're starting to understand the potential uptake of it, you know, we're not utilising the budget provision that's been set aside for that purpose. You know, started off with $100,000 a year set aside for hardship. And, you know, in the last year, with some hard work, we've, you know, granted 44,000 of remission. So there is some opportunity in there. It's just what that looks like.
Thank you. With that DIA policy, is there any avenue for us to influence that and say that actually there's a broader sector of our communities that really need to be able to have that eligibility? And it wouldn't just be in the Waikato region, it would be nationwide. So I'm just wondering about any opportunities we have to influence that policy, because I do understand what you're saying, that we don't want staff having to say, yes, you're impoverished enough to be eligible for this. That would be an uncomfortable situation. Do want to acknowledge, though, that tremendous improvement going from 671 hardship remissions to over 43,000.
So that's the dollars that have been given.
That's the dollars,
Yeah.
right.
So
But still,
yeah, but still.
18 granted versus 985. That's a significant uptick. And I do wonder, you note that it's directly attributed to the promotion by Hamilton City, Waipa, and Waitomo councils. Is there any opportunity to get more councils, more district councils involved in that, in promoting that? And also just wondering, you made the comment on that breakdown by territorial authority, the graph in 14, that we didn't really know why Otorohanga, South Waikato, and Waitomo district were showing higher percentage rates. Have we gone to them directly? Have we gone to those councils and asked if they had any insight?
Through Mr. Chair, no, not specifically. So it was just a request of our rates team leader in terms of were there any themes that the team were getting through from customers around issues there. And the only point that she could potentially relate it to was potentially a greater area of which would impact potentially and
Just wondering if there's an opportunity to verify going directly to the district councils and seeing what they're saying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Noted. Next year.
On page 88, you've got the remissions. I can understand QE2 because people who've got QE2 land get a remission for that. What intrigues me is how you get a remission for PT indirect rail. Does that mean you're not close to the railway, you can ask for a permission.
So through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of our public transport rates in general, there is a cap at which those rates are applied. So the application of the rates doesn't go on. In the rating mechanism, we can't apply a cap in rating. We have to do it through a commission policy.
But what I notice here is QE2 have got 573 people got remission. When it comes to the Indirect Rail, you've got 582 people, but they're obviously not getting a general rate submission, which is only at 18. So are they specifically ringing, saying, I want to be released from the PT rate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it won't be that they're asking to be relieved from the rail rate or the PT rate. It is part of our rate setting process. And like I say, the public transport indirect rate is an example, is that it's been assessed that the benefit is not endless. The benefit will be capped at a point in time. So the limit used to be, you would rate it up to a $2 million capital value, for example. But we can't stop applying the rate to a property because it's worth more than $2 million. So the way that we have to deal with that acknowledgement that there's a maximum benefit that anyone's going to receive is through a remission policy, which we apply automatically.
Right, I don't doubt,
yeah.
And so Nevo.
Just a thought on, it came up yesterday a wee bit in terms of Waipa District Council do those environmental benefit lots, which basically allow you subdivision rights, but they're not necessarily doing a very good job of making sure that the people that get those are maintaining the biodiversity integrity that is assumed when you do that. It might be worth just touching base with QE2 occasionally, or because they do occasionally have where land title changes hands and someone's got a QE covenant, but they're not necessarily looking after it very well. And I wouldn't want us to be giving them a remission if they're in a bit of a battle with QE2 because they're not looking after it properly, because it kind of defeats the whole purpose of it. So, and look, I don't quite know what that would look like, Janine, so I need to talk to the right people, but just something worth checking in on.
Thank you, Stu. And if I may ask a question, it was asked of me yesterday, in fact, where farmers are fencing off land, which is suitable otherwise for grazing and planting it in native forest, is there any way that they can claim, riparian, is there any way that they can claim permission on the rates pertaining to the piece of dirt which they've taken the time and money to fence off and plant?
Off the top of my head, we've got a couple of things, but I mean, potentially running into massive administration problems. That many of those little areas, I mean, some are quite significant, in which case it's very, but for the average farm with most of a hectare identified, I'm not convinced it's the most effective way to recognise what they're doing. Is sum it up. So their whole admin intersection, I think there's a better way, and the government are working on that at the moment with biodiversity credits. I think that's probably a more effective way to do it if we can get there. But and yet, really, is every bit of remission you give, make it up somewhere else by increasing the rest of the rates. And I'm not convinced, but
well, the answer, that's exactly the answer I go. I'll just put the rates up on the rest of your property.
yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
Wasn't the answer they wanted to hear. Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's the point that Stu made, that the government's put out a policy on biodiversity farm credits, which could apply on farms for exactly that sort of reason. And so we're preparing a response to that submission. I think that's going to come through policy and strategy at some point, because I think that would be a really effective way of trying to capture that benefit and encourage and incentivise people to want to even do it.
Thank you, Mr. CE.
Stu, or sorry, Councillor Newbom mentioned that sorry, just trying to be formal. So just in relation to, are there existing policies where farmers could go through a process where if they've got a sizable enough retirement of land that they could apply for remission? I don't know if we do have that.
Does the SNA policy?
Okay, I just, because I get asked it all the time too. And I'm just wondering if we do have policies ahead of our ability to influence the national direction there, is there warrant in us, first of all, making sure counselors are aware of what that looks like and what does that process look like, but also ensuring we've got a quick way to point somebody who is interested in it to how they might go about that?
Have you got another question? Anybody
Just
else?
through, Mr. Chair, it's a good idea, and we possibly do. And the real opportunity is going to be through the farm plans, coming up to point people to where they might be able to get opportunities. Of course, a lot of farmers will come and work with us, with our ICM teams, to access our subsidies for plantings and so on, in priority areas. But I'll pass that message on.
I think in terms of, Nebine had mentioned the SNA policy, which isn't on the list, and I think that speaks to the difficulty with the application of the current policy, because it requires, I think from memory, regionally significant, so defined within district plan, which is where the policy isn't really effective. But I think in light of the number of changes that are happening, needs to be seen as council's responsibility coming potentially from as well.
SNOs can be 1/4 of a hectare or less sometimes as well, which kind of pretty hard to.
Just on that, I mentioned at the council meeting a couple of weeks ago, there is a group in Cambridge now who are targeting that particular sector. They're doing 1 million natives a year and planting out $15,000 a hectare, which seemed to me incredibly cheap. Turnkey operation. They look after it for 2 years, guarantee the growth of the plant. So it was on Country Calendar. So I'll encourage council to talk to them and see what they can do to assist. And if we can provide some sort of assistance for farmers to convert their SNAs into native vegetation, then we should be encouraged to do so. Okay.
Bear in mind though, SNA isn't necessarily significant because of its native biodiversity, so the two aren't necessarily the same thing. Significant, yeah, as I understand it, yeah, be a bit wary of that, yeah.
They were providing remedial planting for.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I'm well aware of all that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion, rates information 30 June 23 as presented by Janine. Over, please. Move it then, a seconder. Yes, thank you. All in favour? Aye, against? Carried. Thank you. All right, the next one is a very important subject. Director expenses for the quarter ended 30 June 2023. Through that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a standard report that comes to the committee setting out allowances and expenses for councillors, the chief executive and directors as well. So happy to take the report as read unless there's any questions from committee members.
There's no questions.
Just one, I was a bit surprised talking, I'm not going to say who it is, a mayor the other day said, I have no idea what my CEO's expenses are, which sort of surprised me a little bit. Is what we're doing here pretty standard? I would have thought it was. There you go. Yeah. It wasn't Waikato District either.
Yes, I think.
And just say from a governance perspective, it would be unusual the chief executive's expenses not to be scrutinised and approved by the board of a public company.
Yeah.
So it just stands to reason that we should be doing the same. And happy to listen to our chief executive. He thinks otherwise.
I think open transparency is the easiest way to be, because it puts yourselves, as political elected members, in a safer position that you do know what's going on behind closed doors.
And if I can just add to that, I would be surprised that the government auditor is allowing that behaviour to continue. So.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, I would say the process that we have very much adheres with the control of one, and that works throughout the whole system. So right through, it's not one up approval, but there's a separate approval process in terms of the chair's expenses as well. So there's always independent review. What we're dealing with are matters of sensitive expenditure for which the auditor has zero tolerance, actually not follow that sort of approval process, which interestingly we get called out on for any breach of that. And I think we uphold really good processes based from a transparency perspective.
But given what the bloomin' auditors charge us, it seems a bit bloody weird that they're putting us under scrutiny for this, yet they're letting other district councils just wave it away. It's weird, man. And
Can I explain that?
yeah.
I'm suggesting that the rest of our systems are so clean and squeaky clean and transparent that they have to look at somewhere else to raise some questions.
But you'd think it would be a standard thing they'd expect to see when they went to a council. But
Yeah, I guess they're auditing us against our policies as opposed to good practice. Well, with it,
that's on good practice, don't they? Or do they not? I thought they did.
not actively.
Yeah, but if we don't give them enough information to do their bloomin' audit, they should be telling us. Yeah.
Their recommendation letter should highlight any areas where they believe our systems, our internal control systems, are deficient. And in normal circumstances, that would be one area that they should be highlighting. It's not a major, but it should be highlighting. And I am surprised to hear that there are councils that are not subjecting their CE's expenses to scrutiny. Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I suppose to me a more relevant question is, should it be in public open or public excluded? But I would have suggested that in, where you have no secrets, you have no lies. It's a lot easier place to be by having it publicly open in the way that we do it.
So can I just ask the question around the table? Is there any appetite for moving this particular paper to public excluded? Never. Okay.
And look, we did have a situation last term where we had an individual councillor, and I think it would be harder to deal with that if it was hidden from the public as well.
Thank you. Carol. You're moving, thank you. Seconder. Councillor Story. In favour? Aye. Against? Carried. The next agenda item is tenders board contracts, 1 April to 30 June. Again, Janine's the paper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, this is one of our transparency and accountability reporting mechanisms where any contracts that have been awarded through the tenders board, which is comprised of members of the executive leadership team, are reported through here for the committee's information. So as is noted, I think in the report, the tenders board delegation kicks in where the value of a contract exceeds the individual delegation of any director of 250,000. And so that just gives us additional controls and oversight of those procurement activities. Where the contract reaches a value where council is committing funds of more than $2 million and it's over multiple years, then those matters are brought to this committee for approval. So it used to be a separate contracts committee. That role's been folded into the terms of reference for this committee. We haven't had any of those for this reporting period.
Thank you, Janine. Just one question I have, that's in relation to the last item on page 105, the contract value of it. Should that be, does that qualify for inclusion in our major project?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I hadn't thought of it that way. It's a construction project that will be done within a year. If it is something that's of interest, we can do that.
I'm just asking the question, what
Yeah.
do we need? What is the qualification standard to
Yeah.
elevate it to a
Normally through the key project reference group, it is those high risk projects and the ones that carry a high degree of risk with them, political, reputational, financial risk.
Okay,
Mr. Chair.
thank you.
Janine may have just answered the question, but the likes of the tender for the vessel that's going to go on the river once it's built, that would have come to this committee then, because that was, I'm not sure whether that was all done in public or not, but there's a multi-million dollar contract for that vessel. So that would have exceeded the 2 million. So that would have come to this committee. Would it stay within? And if not, I do want to signal that I will be asking that the chair of the portfolio, that the expenditure will be spent, such as the vessel that the chair of ICM is included in that, so that there is political oversight, because expenditure done exclusively by staff, although within budget, which councillors will be held accountable if anything goes wrong, should have council input at the decision making. So that's the background of why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the differentiation with what would come to this committee is both the financial value of the contract, but also the multi-year nature of it. And when I say multi-year, it is an activity that's repeated over multiple years. And that's really on the basis that by entering into a contract of that nature, you're committing future funds, and through plans in future councils where those budgets haven't been set. But if you're entering into that contract, then unless you're going to breach or cancel the contract, that commitment lies in place. So it sort of is at the front of the queue for funding in some respects. So it's that element that is being managed through that delegation level in particular. In the case of the vessel, the procurement for that was dealt with through the tenders board. But there had been discussion at council in terms of the budget that was required in order to be able to deliver that project, and was that appropriate. The other control mechanism that we have in place over the vessel is also the key projects reference group, who maintain regular oversight. And the process at the moment is a monthly reporting package to that group, which is a subset of the Risk and Assurance Committee, but with those committee chairs as relevant as well, to be able to monitor the status of that project. Is it on track? Is it off track? What are the issues? And there's the opportunity to do a deep dive in those areas through that process, as well as the regular reporting of those projects through the Risk and Assurance Committee. So that's the sort of the different mechanisms, I guess, that we have to make sure that those ones that are deemed high risk actually have additional governance oversight on them.
Maybe if I can just add, those projects are all subject to traffic light management system, and Janine might want to imagine if one of those goes red, that would be. Is that not the process?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the reporting is through Risk and Assurance. So that's where all of that visibility is achieved. I guess the question would be, and I'm sorry, I don't have visibility of it, in terms of the vessel, whether there's any other reporting that's coming through the Integrated Catchment Management Committee as well as a project that's of interest to them, and as part of the shovel-ready reporting.
It's yet to get that detail, but
Okay.
we are getting regular reports through staff as happening and how photos and
Yeah, and so, as I say, there should be a mid-month drop of project status reports for the projects that are under the oversight of the Key Projects Reference Group at the moment, which has been Reboot, the Freshwater Plan and Coastal Plan Review, and Shovel Ready, but particularly the vessel. So, yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Any no further questions? Not all. Motion 10 contracts 1A.3. Please. Favour? Carried. Next agenda item we have annual report for civil financial services. And Janine will explain civil financial services to us and what it does.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Civic Financial Services is a company that's owned by a number of local authorities across the council. We hold 22,000 shares, so only 0.2% of the company, with a notional value of only $20,000. So this is noted for the committee's information. Civic Financial Services, I guess, over time have provided a range of services, including insurance, the local authority protection program back in the day. Currently, really, their main activity is the administration of a KiwiSaver scheme on behalf of staff in the sector. So activity is minimal, really focused around that KiwiSaver scheme administration. They report noted for the committee's information, giving our very small shareholding.
Thanks, Denise. Any questions?
Oh, I just noted here that employee remuneration has gone up by 100,000 in the last year. It's page 118. At the same time as there's been a shortfall or a drop in the amount that was earned. Just a comment, that's all. It's just
Thank you.
whether somebody's obviously independently audited, but whether we look at that at all.
Not our 2% of 100,000 is not really significant. So I'll move to Councillor Smith, please.
thank you. For an organisation that pays directors' fees of $100,000 and then receiving fees and then having a surplus of 152,000. I've asked these questions in a former life. Why we even bother? Why don't we write it off? Why don't we give them to somebody else and move on? Because this is this organisation is nothing what it used to be, and it's really needs to be wound up. But for the superannuation, that's and whether that shouldn't be, we should push to get them to move it to somebody else's administration. So my view on this is that it's a waste of time being part of it. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Do you want to comment, or do you want me to? Well, basically, the reason that it has to be disclosed and that we do need to consider the report, we are the legal owners, shares. This is a statutory obligation for us to consider the table.
Is it not just a stroke of a pen to give them to somebody else? Waste of time.
Noted, thank you. Ian, have you got a question? Sorry. Okay. Motion, Civil Financial Service Annual Report be adopted. Thanks, Michael. Pamela, you second that? Favour? That moves us now to the excluded section, if I'm correct. Okay, so we have a resolution to exclude the public from the next section. Thank you. Pamela and Sue. All in favour? Against? Carried. There's no one